Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to our pop-up masterclass series. It's not really a series, it's just one day. This is Healing Your Inner Child by Design. I'm Dr. Karen Parker, and I'm so excited to have you all here with us today. So, I am Dr. Karen Parker. I'm so excited to have you all here today. I want to start before we get rolling and just talk a minute about why we're doing this class today. So last week we did a 3-day series on harmony at home, and it was really about parenting with human design and how to do your family with human design. And in my experience of teaching that material, anytime I teach that material, questions about inner child come up. And questions about inner child often come up because when we hear stories about how we could be doing family differently, it sometimes triggers us. And sometimes what it triggers in us is grief. Sometimes it triggers in us sort of this longing for something different. Sometimes it triggers in us a different perspective and a different understanding of our own personal narrative. And so my goal today is to go back and revisit some of the Harmony at Home material that we talked about last week, but really talk about it through the lens of how could you, understanding this information, help you with your own healing. I also really want to be mindful that when we talk about healing your inner child, there's, of course, all kinds of different degrees of healing that can be done. And sometimes the things we need to heal from are things that are really, really big and really, really painful. And so I do want to just set the intention that my goal today is to give you information. And my goal today is to also support you if you discover when we go through this information that you're really triggered, that this is something that feels very emotional for you, that a lot of stuff comes up for you. I am going to give you a link to our quantum alignment system practitioners, but I also really want to encourage you, if you really get triggered and this is something you're working on, human design gives you a really great perspective shifting. It brings you really great paradigm shifting capacity. And sometimes we need extra help. And my intention is to not address any acute pain that might come up for you where you might need extra support. This is just a journey through exploring our story about who we are and how we became who we are, and really looking a little bit at how we interpreted what we experienced as children ourselves, and what we, our inner children, need sometimes in terms of paradigm shifting. And if you need extra help, please, please reach out and get yourself some help, because you deserve to be healed. You deserve to be healthy and happy. You deserve to know in the core of your being that you deserve to be loved, that you are worthy of love. And so, again, my intention is not to trigger you. And if you get really triggered, and sometimes that happens for you, to really give yourself permission to go get support. Or if you feel like you need a little bit of extra help just getting over an old story, we'll also post the links to our quantum alignment system practitioners as well. And I have a lot for you today, so that's kind of where I'm going to stop, except that I just want to add one other piece. One of the most interesting things about being a human being is we start off as children. And as a grandparent, last weekend I took my grandson's apple picking, and then we went to an open house at a barn, and we went and rode ponies. It's so beautiful to watch the beginning of life through the perspective and the lens of children, right? There's so much we as adults can learn from children that we have forgotten, like the power of your imagination and possibility thinking, right? And being in the moment with your feelings. And when we think about how we start off our life, we start off our life as children, which means sometimes our perspective is influenced by our youth or our immaturity or our inability to process all the things that are happening. And so I want to also just invite you into a gentle reframing that sometimes the things we saw or we learned as children, and as we grow and we mature, sometimes that affords us the opportunity to see the story now through a different lens, through a different perspective. So let's get started. So if I have not had the privilege of meeting you yet, my name is Dr. Karen Parker. I'm the founder and creator of Quantum Human Design and the Quantum Alignment System, which is an energy psychology integrated approach to using quantum human design and energy psychology as a coaching tool. I am a multiple best-selling author. I'm the world's top-selling human design author. I have a PhD in integrative medicine. I've been an emotional freedom techniques practitioner since 2000. I've been a life coach since 1998. I've also been a certified parent educator since 1995. I studied with and worked for Ra Uru Hu. I've been teaching human design since 1999. I am a Quantum University guest lecturer. I am a TEDx presenter. I'm the host of the podcast Quantum Revolution. I am also an Omega Institute, the Shift Network, and a Humanities Team faculty member. And over on the right, you can see some of the books that I've written, including my new book, Quantum Wellness. So here's what we're going to be covering today. We are going to be exploring our own inner child. We're going to be talking about what our human design tells us about healing our childhood wounds. We're going to be working on writing a new empowered narrative about who we are. And we might not be doing an actual writing in this hour, but I really want to encourage you and talk a little bit about why you need to literally sit down and with your hand and a pen rewrite some of your stories about who you think you are. We're going to talk about the 5 energy types and what you can do to heal your type wounds. And we're going to talk about how you can be a better parent to your own children, or how you can translate this important information to better help your coaching clients, even the ones who aren't parents. And as I said, you might get triggered during this presentation. I really want to invite you into a perspective that this triggering is a catalyst for a reframe. It's a catalyst for us to begin to explore how we could how we could take back control and tell the story in a better way. So, did I miss one? I didn't. All right, so we're going to explore probably a really important concept in general, but we're going to look at it through the lens of parenting and our inner child today. But we're going to talk a little bit about facts versus fiction, which seems to be a big theme in the collective right now too. And in reality, when we start looking at the story we tell about who we are and how we are, that ultimately, as adults, we control the narrative. And that's not something we're often trained to do. That's not something that it's often even not supported in learning how to do. But in reality, probably the only thing you absolutely have control over in your life is the story you tell yourself and the world about who you are and how you are. And when we remember that we have this control over the story, when we remember our control over our own narrative, and we remember that our story is a key part of what's creating our experience of the world, you can start to see that when you control your own story, when you take back control over that story, not only do you hold on to that power that lives within you, you actually start to take back control over how you create your life. Now, here's some other fact versus fiction things I want us to think about. Many of us were raised in family systems or in a collective environment that supported the following ideas. Children misbehave because they're spoiled. Children misbehave because they're bad. Children misbehave because they're just like their mother or their father. Children misbehave because they're jealous, needy, clingy, whiny, etc. Or children misbehave because they have ADD or some other kind of psychological issue, and I use that term very, very loosely. And of course, if that's the belief that we have, and we have a child that's misbehaving, that misbehavior needs to be controlled, right? And so the natural step in the evolution of the thought that I have a bad child, and I have a child who is misbehaving, and I have a child that is not in control, and it's my job to control that child. If our child is misbehaving and out of control, it's because ultimately we as parents are bad parents, right? And this is part of the guilt trip or the shame that we lay on parents sometimes, that when kids are misbehaving, when they show up and they're out of control, it's the parents' fault. And then we create this loop in our thinking around parenting and families, right? Bad parents makes misbehaving kids means bad parents, and everybody's feeling pretty bad about the whole situation. The kid's not feeling good about it, the parents aren't feeling good about it. This whole cultural norm, maybe sometimes even in your family, maybe this is your familial belief system, creates a whole mess of problems for families in general. And of course, we have a different belief. The opposite of that is, of course, if my child is good, then I'm a good parent, right? Or good children are the result of good parenting. Sometimes good children are a result of good children being bribed to behave. Sometimes good children are the result of being empaths, and they figure out how to keep the peace so that keeps them getting out of, keeps them out of trouble. Lots of reasons why we have good kids, and innumerable reasons why we have good kids. Some of it has to do with parenting, most of it doesn't. All right. So here's the thing that I want you to think about as we get started today. In the story that you tell about yourself and your childhood, were you a good kid or a bad kid? And why? And I will share with you a personal story. I was a good kid. I was like super, uber good, like people pleaser, extraordinaire. My husband was a bad kid, right? My husband is an incredibly brilliant man, incredibly brilliant architect, a world award winning architect. He's designed like Olympic facilities, like that caliber of architect, right? But growing up in his family, he was the bad kid because he's a third line profile, right? A very curious third line profile. Maybe some of you relate. And so he did a lot of experimenting and exploring as a kid. And that was very stressful for his parents. And so he got labeled as the bad kid in his family. He has there's 4 kids, 3 siblings. He was the bad one, right? His next brother down was the good one. And then there was the girl, and she had her own category. And then he had another brother who was the baby, right? So he was the bad kid. So when you think about your childhood, what label did you get? Were you the good kid or the bad kid, and why? Why were you the good kid or the bad kid? Is the label that you got fact? Were you actually the bad kid? Or were you actually the good kid? I was actually not the good kid. I was just sneaky, okay? Or was this fact about whether you were good or bad just a story? Was it just a story? Think about that for a minute, and I want to unpack this for you. The real reason why children misbehave is because they have unmet energy needs. And they're just learning how to express those needs, right? My 4-year-old grandson can't tell me, hey, I'm feeling really unloved right now, Mom. You got a new baby and she's really cute and everybody knows that she's really cute and everybody's paying attention to her and nobody's paying attention to me anymore. And I need your attention, Mom, and I'm feeling really left out and unloved, Mom. He can't say that, right? What he does is when the baby's sitting on the floor, he walks by and he just boop, knocks her over. Oh, she fell, he says, right? And everybody says, oh, Wesley, stop it. Wesley, why are you being so bad? Wesley, right? Obviously, they're all sleep deprived and they have a new baby, so they're working it out. But he can't communicate clearly what's going on with him. And so he misbehaves. He does things he's not supposed to do. All children do this, right? Children are misbehaving because they can't communicate their needs effectively. They're just learning how to communicate their needs, and their needs are changing depending on where they are developmentally. Here's what children need. By the way, so do all adults. They need to feel lovable and valuable. They need to feel powerful and capable. They need to experiment and explore. That's part of learning. And they need attention, or in other words, they need their parents and the adult caregivers in their lives to be present. Again, we need this too. And when we don't get these needs met appropriately, when we don't get these needs met in a way that's healthy, that's loving, that's nurturing, that supports us in learning How am I loved? What am I, what is my lovability? How am I valued? How do I be valuable in the world? How do I set good boundaries? How do I stand in my value? How am I powerful in the world? How do I learn to be an empowered person? How do I learn to say no when I want to say no and yes when I want to say yes? How do I discover my own capability? And how do I discover my capability without the fear of making a mistake? Because what if I make a mistake? Oh, hey, making a mistake is part of growing up, right? So I've learned and integrated that to learn about my capability, I also have to experiment and explore. And I'm doing it in the presence of somebody who is available to me emotionally, energetically, who has the time for me, right? Every child is going to get these needs met in different ways depending on their human design. And if they don't get these needs met in a healthy way, they will learn to get these needs met in unhealthy ways, and those unhealthy ways will be influenced by their human design chart. All right? So I want you to explore for just a minute as you're listening to this call. What needs, if we go back to this list, what needs do you feel like you didn't get met as a child? Lovability, value, self-worth, power, capability, exploration, attention. What needs do you feel like didn't get met for you as a child? Just take quick notes. And if you feel comfortable, you're welcome to put that in the chat as well. And how is that impacting your story now that you tell about yourself as an adult? How is that experience of feeling like you didn't get those needs met as a child? How might that be impacting your story that you tell now about who you are and how you are? Are you still being the good kid or the bad kid? And what part of that story do you need to rewrite to make it more true? I think I'm back. What part of your story do you need to rewrite to make it more true? Hannah, just checking. Am I back now?
Yes.
Okay. Here's the thing that I want to bring to your awareness. When we start creating our story, our identity about who we are, if you take a line on a piece of paper and you draw a point at one end of the paper and you draw a line to the other edge of the paper, and that line represents your timeline of your whole life. So for me, that would be 60 years in this line, right? Most of us are ending the chapter of our identity before we reach the redemption arc of our story, before we figure out how to turn that into a gift or a blessing. Okay, so most of us end our story at a chapter. We end the chapter of our story before we figure out what to do with what we've learned. And so we define ourselves as the bad kid because when we were kids, our parents maybe didn't understand our need to experiment and explore. And maybe our parents were really stressed about money. And maybe our parents had other stuff going on in their lives and they just needed us to be quiet and sit still. And we were experimenting and exploring. And instead of saying, oh, I wasn't really allowed to experiment and explore because I'm a really curious person, we end the story with the repression of our experimentation and not how we had to recover that. And part of that recovery was part of our redemption arc, and that was part of our identity, and that was part of what we learned to do. And ultimately, as we learned to recover that part of ourselves, that became part of our life purpose. And now we spend our life purpose teaching other people how to recover their creativity, and we don't include the redemption arc in the story. Does that make sense to you all? That we end our, oftentimes when we're telling the story of who we are and we're identifying with who we are, we're identifying with a chapter and not the whole story. And so here's what I really want to bring us back into today. Let's talk about taking back the rest of the story. When we stop the chapter at I was good, I was bad, we don't include all the other amazing things we've done since then. All right, I apologize. We're having a combination of internet and Zoom updates. All right, so let's imagine for a moment that we're looking at ourselves, we're looking at our childhood and our children's selves, and even our parents through this window. And let's imagine for just a minute that this window has 4 panes. And each one of these panes is going to be informing us about our perspective on what's going on with ourselves and our identity as children. So the first pane that we're going to be looking through is your quantum human design, where your actual design is going to be impacting how you behave, what you need, your needs as a child, your needs as an adult, and even the healing arc that you can be taking yourself on as you take back control of your story. Through the second lens, when we look at our childhood and we look at the things that we got labeled as being bad or good for, some of what was going on was just where we were developmentally. So, for example, 2-year-olds and 14-year-olds are going to be going through a phase in life where they are learning about becoming powerful. They are being empowered, right? And part of how they cultivate and learn about being powerful is they power struggle, right? What's one of the very first words a 2-year-old says? They learn to say the word no, right? And 14-year-olds will say, no, I won't, and you can't make me. And sometimes you can't, right? As a parent. So sometimes the things that we get labeled for are things that were actually natural parts of our child development. In the bottom lens, when we're looking at our story, or we're looking at our children, or we're looking at ourselves, in the bottom left-hand side, we have the lens of personal conditioning. Our own lived experiences, and our parents' lived experiences, and our cultural experiences were influencing how we got treated and what happened to us as children. One of my favorite stories when I was parent coaching, I lived in a neighborhood that there were where all the Secret Service agents for George W. Bush lived. This was when I lived in Houston, Texas. So he had retired from the presidency, and all of his Secret Service agents lived in Houston, and they were gone a lot, right? They were mostly men, mostly dads, and when George would travel, so would the Secret Servicemen. Sorry, when George would travel, so would all the Secret Service agents. They would travel, and they would leave their wives and their children at home, and sometimes they were gone for a long time. They'd go to Kennebunkport, Maine, right, for the season. I had a client who had a son who missed his dad terribly, and he was angry that his dad was gone all the time. And the way that he expressed that anger is he was really, really challenging in terms of how he behaved with his mom when his dad was gone. But when his dad was home, he was really, really, really good, right? And he was good because he didn't want to make his dad upset with him, because he had this really small window to be with his dad, and he saved all of his emotional expression for when his dad was gone and he'd take it out on his mom, right? Our personal conditioning deeply impacts our parenting and how we were parenting and the things that we were doing sometimes. Sometimes the things we were doing as kids were because of other circumstances. Lastly, this bottom right-hand corner, the mistaken motivation corner, means, all right, so in the bottom right-hand corner, the lens through which we have to also understand ourselves and our children is that we have energy needs. And when those energy needs don't get met in a healthy way, we act out. We call that the mistaken motivations. And there are some pretty key reasons, pretty key mistaken motivations, 4 key mistaken motivations that we have when we act out. Again, we talked about this a lot last week in Harmony at Home. I want to bring this a little bit to your perspective today. So if we don't learn how to get our energy needs met appropriately, we act out, right? A 2-year-old is not going to be able to say to you, hey, mom, I'm feeling a little bit disenfranchised in the structure of the household right now, and I'd really like to explore some ways for me to get some power, because I need a little extra power right now because I'm going through a developmental cycle where I need to learn about power, and also, I'm a manifester and I need power, right? Your 2-year-old is not going to say that to you. And your challenge as a parent is to learn how to help that child get those needs met appropriately. And your role as a child, if you are an adult child who has experienced this, is to recognize I wasn't being bad. I wasn't a bad kid. I was a kid that needed to be empowered. I was a kid that needed freedom with boundaries, but I was a kid that needed freedom. And I didn't get that. In fact, my parents were scared of my manifestor power because they saw me doing all these things that maybe could be dangerous and they wanted to protect me and keep me safe. So they were very, very controlling because they were afraid that something would happen to me. Your human design shows you how you process energy so that you can feel lovable, valuable, powerful, trust yourself, understand your emotions, be authentic, be courageous, feel energetic and vital, and know how to make the right choices for you. If when you understand and live the highest expression of your chart, these 9 qualities are the 9 characteristics or key energies that make us raise us up into being strong, resilient adults. If we're not raised according to our design, and we're not raised according to where we are developmentally, and we're not raised in an environment where the expectation and the conditioning is one that's healthy and supports growth, if we're not raised to learn how to get our energy needs met appropriately, then we actually become deficient in resiliency. Our bandwidth for capacity, our energy is spent trying to protect ourselves because we don't feel safe or okay being who we are or how we are. So let's talk a little bit about conditioning and lived experience. Unfortunately, most of us are taught that there's only one way to be successful, healthy, and to make a meaningful contribution in the world. We learn how to hide who we really are. We learn to compromise our desires and to give up what's most natural for us in order for us to be successful and healthy in the rigid way that we've been taught. Right? And if we don't fit into this formula, and most of us don't, by the way, when we don't fit into this formula, we internalize the idea that we are wrong, something is wrong for us, and this is really important, we spend an awful lot of energy trying to hide our authentic self because we internalize the idea that it's not okay or safe or valuable or successful for me to be who I am and how I am. So we hide our authentic self. And I personally believe, based on some of the research that I've done, that many of us are burned out. And let me say, in America right now, 72% of Americans are reporting themselves as being burned out, which is an utterly mind-blowing number. That I would argue that a lot of us are burned out because we do not feel safe being who we are in the world, expressing ourselves in the world. And so we spend our energy trying to cover ourselves up. And that's exhausting. And it's an absolute waste of energy, right? It takes a lot of energy to maintain an identity that isn't true to who you are. That means every time you say yes to something you want to say no to because you learned to be the good kid, right? Or anytime you say no to something you want to say yes to, every time you try to be something or someone you're not, every time you make a choice that feels wrong, even though your logical mind is telling you something different, this is about what it feels like. Every time you give up a dream or a desire, every time you nurture someone else at cost to yourself, every time you choose circumstances that actually take you away from your joy and your authentic self, you use an enormous amount of energy. And when you use your vital life force energy to maintain a facade of inauthentic choices, you will eventually burn out and oftentimes sabotage everything else in your life, including your health. And that sabotage, that explosion, that sabotage that happens is oftentimes actually a cosmic wake-up call. It's actually your higher self saying, okay, cut it out. Stop. You cannot continue on this path anymore. The greater the disconnect from your authentic self, the greater the pain you're going to have in your life. And that pain is telling you that you're off course, and it's helping you realize that maybe you need some course correction. If what you're experiencing in your life right now is the sum total of every choice that you've ever made in your life, then part of what has to shift for you is you have to shift the way in which you choose, right? You are hardwired energetically. How you're hardwired energetically is going to influence the kinds of choices that you make and what you need to fully express your authentic self. In other words, when we start following the chart and when we start following strategy and authority in the chart, what we're really doing is we're healing the disconnect between the authentic self and your body. I'm going to say that again because it's so important. what we're really doing is we're healing the disconnect between the authentic self and the body. Your body is a compass. It contains all the impulses, the senses, the feelings to let you know what feels right, what is right for you, and what isn't. And when we grow up and we become conditioned, when we are told, don't do that, when we're told, don't do that, sit down, be quiet, don't be this way, don't use your sacral, say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, don't say right? When we are told how to be, and it feels constrictive and it feels sad when you want to go outside and play, but you can't because you are told you have to do math so that you can be a successful person in the world. Eventually, to survive, we have to shut our connection to our body down because our bodies are screaming in protest. You ask a 5-year-old who wants to go outside and play because they are still in that integrative phase of their development, and the teacher is saying, nope, you can't go outside and play. You need to do your math. You need to do your reading. You need to do your homework. And they are trying so hard to follow the rules. They don't want to get in trouble, but their body is saying, but I need to go move. I need to go play. I need to go outside because I'm still only 5. And we tell them, no, you can't do that. What happens is they get disconnected from their innate natural intelligence. They get disconnected from the body. And that's really what's happened to most of us. And so when we learn our human design and we learn about strategy and authority for each of the 5 types, part of what we're learning is the healing path to get us back into the body so that we can get back into that decision making, feeling, sensual space viscerally that lets us know, hey, this is what's right for you and this is what isn't. This is what direction you should go in and this is what's not. This is what you should say yes to because it feels so good. And this is what you really need to be saying no to because it does not feel that great. Now, one of the other things we have to talk about is the impact long term of internalizing the story that it's not okay or safe for me to be who I am and how I am. When we grow up and we end the chapter of our story with an identity that says, I'm bad, I'm not lovable, I'm good, I learn how to be loved by being good. When we internalize the parts of the story to say, I'm not capable, it's not okay for me to experiment and explore, or I'm not worthy of people being present to me. When we internalize those things, even if they're not huge, if you want to think of it through the lens of trauma, even if we haven't experienced major traumatic events as are defined in psychological health manuals like the DSM-2, if we experience that internalization of the story that it's not okay or safe for me to be who I am and how I am, if we internalize that story, it actually disrupts our integrity and actually creates within us a state of low-grade PTSD. And I want to be really clear when I'm talking about this. I really want to be clear about distinguishing between macro trauma and micro trauma. I'm not talking about macro trauma. I'm talking about micro trauma. And micro trauma is anytime somebody told you or you had an experience that said it was not okay or safe for you to be who you are and how you are, that is micro trauma. And when we keep taking that story in and we make it part of our identity, it actually impacts what I'll call integrity in the chart. Okay, integrity in the chart lives in the gate 26. Now, when I'm talking about this right now, I'm talking about this not through the lens of your specific chart. So you don't have to get your chart out and look at it and go, I don't have this colored in my chart. I don't have this in my chart. We all have all of the chart. If you have it colored in, it means it's a life theme for you. If you have it open, it means you've experienced this in a variety of different ways, but we all have the gate 26. The gate 26 is the place where we hold PTSD in the chart. It's one of the places where we hold PTSD in the chart. It is physiologically tied to the thymus gland, which is part of your immune function. And so what happens is when we hold trauma in the body, it actually impacts our immune function. And we have lots of physiological data on this now. This isn't just human design. There's lots of hard science behind the relationship between trauma and immune function. So even though you might not have experienced major trauma, you may still have experienced micro trauma. Every time you learned that it wasn't okay or safe for you to be who you are or how you are, and you took that in and you made that part of your story, your body might be experiencing that and storing that as trauma in your body, and that might be impacting your immune function. I find it really interesting in human design how many times in all of my client readings over the years, people have come to me with mysterious autoimmune disorders that nobody can diagnose and nobody knows what it is, from people who have a broken heart from believing that it's not okay or safe for them to be who they are and how much headway we can make sometimes in managing those kinds of illnesses when we start to change our story, when we start to internalize a different story about our value and our worth. Now, integrity, when I define integrity in human design, I'm talking about integrity not only through the lens of moral integrity, I'm talking about it through the lens of structural integrity, meaning when we value ourselves, when we are standing strong in our self-worth and we value ourselves, we experience physical integrity, meaning our bodies are healthy and vital and we take care of our bodies. We experience resource integrity. That's when we learn to use our material resources in a sustainable way and we're not using money and resources to prove our value. We stand in identity integrity, meaning we feel like we can fully manifest the value of our authentic identity and we don't compromise who we are for the sake of money or anything else. We stand in moral integrity, meaning we have the courage to do the right thing and make sure that our actions are honest and aligned with high principles and values. And we stay in energetic integrity, meaning we're not burning out because we're making good and clear and consistent commitments and agreements. Anytime we experience trauma, which by the way, the studies that I did originally around trauma was that 60% of people in the United States report themselves as feeling traumatized. And that's an important distinction. They feel traumatized, even if they haven't experienced an actual traumatic event. I think nowadays it's probably more like 85% of people feel traumatized, even though they haven't had a traumatic event by definition. And really what's going on is if we go to a more modern definition of trauma, I would say a trauma is any event, circumstance, or perception that causes you to lose connection with your lovability, your sense of value, and your right place in the world. This is what happens when we learn as children that it's not okay or safe for us to be who we are and how we are. Now, we have an obsession right now about post-traumatic stress disorder. We talk a lot about trauma in our culture. When we stop our story, we end the story at the chapter where we became good or bad, when we internalized the narrative, I'm good or I'm bad, that becomes post-traumatic stress. If we take the chapter and we look at what did we do with the rest of the story, how did we grow through the trauma, we then have the opportunity to move into a season of post-traumatic growth. I would like to encourage us all to focus on the idea that we can transform traumatic stress into traumatic growth. And when we transform traumatic stress into traumatic growth, we take back control over the story. We get to decide what decisions we're going to make in response to our trauma and what different sets of decisions we need to make about who we are and how we are in response to our trauma. The human design chart actually gives us a code for how to explore the answer to those questions. If we go back up to the head center, which is a place where we begin inspiring new thoughts and new creative possibilities, we see that the gates of the head center give us a code for asking specific kinds of questions to help us reframe our narrative or reframe our perspective. The gate 64 teaches us to ask the question how. The gate 61 teaches us to ask the question why, and the gate 63 asks the question what, or can you prove it? We can restate those questions differently. And I want to encourage you, as we think about rewriting your story and going beyond the chapter where you ended your story, take a screenshot of these questions. and play with these questions when you start to think about your life and your life story. The questions you can be asking yourselves in terms of making a different set of decisions. What was the big lesson or the blessings from this story? Okay, and I am not saying that we are celebrating and acknowledging if something terrible happened to you, that that thing that happened to you was good, because it wasn't. But I'm saying, what can you take away from that experience so that you get control back over that experience? What did you learn? What lesson or blessings did you get because of what you learned? How can you change the story so that it ends in a place where you become empowered and sovereign over your narrative? Is the decision that you made about yourself as a result of this experience true? Are you actually a bad kid? Are you actually the bad kid? My husband is not the bad kid by any stretch of imagination. And what new dream for yourself can you have? What do you dream of shifting or transforming from this story? These questions are actually questions that I used in a research project that I did. I had people rewrite a story about an event that felt disempowering for them through the lens of these questions, and had them rewrite that story and then read the story back to me. And it was really interesting. In the lab, when we did this, we watched their immune function go up in response to reframing their perspective on the story and on the event based on using these questions. All right, let's go now to the corner of the window that has the mistaken motivations and the unmet energy needs. That's the right-hand side of the window pane. Remember, we said that misbehavior is a way of expressing unmet energy needs, and that the role of parents is to help children learn appropriate ways to get these needs met. Let's look at factors that influence your energy needs. Now, you are going to want to have your chart out for this part of the presentation. And if you don't have your chart for whatever reason, you can go quickly grab a chart. You can go to freehumandesignchart.com right now and grab your free human design chart. And let's start looking at the parts of your chart here. Okay, so let's look at your chart through the lens of unmet energy needs and mischief, and sometimes we call mischief self-sabotage. How does your design sometimes create unmet energy needs and or self-sabotage? So let's look at this first through the lens of type. The 5 quantum human design types have special unique energy needs. These are not limited to the types. Okay, all types need everything that's on this slide, but your type is going to make that need even more amplified. So initiators or manifestors need freedom and power. They need to be informed, and they need support in learning how to manage anger in a healthy, accepting way. That is something you needed from your parents growing up, or if you are raising a manifestor right now, this is something your manifestor child needs. Generators need to feel capable. They need recognition and attention. They need to be asked yes or no questions, and they need support in managing frustration. That is what you needed as a generator child. That is what your generator children need. Time benders or manifesting generators need freedom, power, and capability. They need to be asked yes or no questions, and they need support to manage frustration and anger. If you were a time bender, this is what you needed. Probably still need it, right? I know I do. If you are a projector or an orchestrator, you needed recognition and attention. You needed to feel precious and valuable. You needed help with bitterness, and you needed space, presence, to be able to talk. You needed the space to be able to unpack your feelings and your experiences so you could process them. Calibrators or reflectors, you need time and attention, recognition and consistency. You needed it to feel precious and valuable. You needed help in understanding your sensitivity, and you needed help with disappointment. Again, if you were a reflector child, you needed this. If you have a reflector child, they need this. If they don't get these needs met, they may find unhealthy ways to get these needs met. Let's look at other chart factors. If you have an open or an undefined throat, or an activation center, we call it in quantum human design, That means if you're a generator, projector, or reflector, you need extra support with attention and recognition. That is a high need. And if you don't get that need met appropriately, you may either disappear and never be seen again, you'll be invisible, or you may learn to do inappropriate things to get attention. That makes you a bad child. Disappearing makes you a good child. But either way, you weren't bad or good. You were just needing extra support with recognition and attention. If you have a G center, and I'm going to add to a will center, so this heart in the center of the chart is the G center. This can also sometimes be true of the will center. That's the white triangle to the bottom of the G center. You see in this chart how there's a direct channel connecting the G to the throat center. If you have a G center connection to the throat center or a will center connection to the throat center, you are vulnerable to criticism because when you speak directly from your heart. I call this a turtle configuration. And if you were expressing yourself out in the world and sharing from your heart, and your family said to you, "Oh, why are you doing that? Why are you saying that? That's so dumb." And you were criticized for self-expression, you may have learned to hide out. You may have learned to shut down so that you would not get yourself hurt. You would not be seen. So sometimes when we talk about visibility, when I'm coaching business clients, this is oftentimes a factor that shuts down the desire to be visible. If you have an open or an undefined G center, so if this heart in your chart is open, there's a tendency to question your lovability. This is the design of a child that needs a lot of reassurance that they're loved. This is the design of a child. This is a design of a child who, if you punish them or give them a consequence for their choice, they're going to possibly interpret it as, "You don't love me." I have a child that has an open G, and if she ever got in trouble, and she got in trouble a lot because she was very experimental and exploratory, also sassy, and I love her dearly, right? That anytime as a child when she got in trouble, she would say to me, "You don't love me." I'd say, "No, I love you. I just don't want you to run across the street in front of a car," right? If you have a child or if you are a person with an open will center, there's a tendency energetically for you to question your value. Okay, so if you have an open will center, there's a tendency to question your value. And so children with an open will center need extra support in standing in their value and holding their value. If you have a defined will center, you have the capacity to push power out into the world. That is such a cool and vital and beautiful configuration. And oftentimes what happens in families is you get the label of being stubborn. You get the label of being willful. And what happens is people will get locked into power struggles with you, and then you will learn to shut that power down. And when you start to speak and talk and share from that will center, which is all about sharing your experience and sharing who you are as part of the resources that you're here to give the world, people will say to you, "Well, who are you to say that? Who are you to talk about that? Why are you all you do is talk about yourself?" That's not true. Somebody with a will center, their reference point is the I. They talk about themselves. If you have an open or an undefined sacral, in other words, if you're a manifestor, projector, reflector, you need alone time. You need help knowing when enough is enough. You needed to learn that you're not here to work in the traditional way of working, and you should not ever be labeled lazy because you don't work the way other people do, the way generators do. You needed to learn that you need to go to bed and rest before you're depleted, and that if you're going to sleep when you're tired, it's too late and it's going to affect the quality of your sleep. And when your sleep gets affected, it probably affected your behavior, right? And that you do better with your own space in your own bedroom. And if you were a projector or a reflector, you also needed recognition, right? If you were a child with either an open head center or an open root center, this is a child that feels a lot of pressure. And oftentimes in family systems, that pressure is the pressure to fulfill the familial expectations, to act the way you're supposed to act, to do what you're supposed to do. And that pressure can sometimes cause you to disconnect from your own path and do whatever it is that you need to do to fulfill the pressure so you don't feel that pressure anymore. If you are a third line or a 6-line profile, that's a 1-3, a 3-5, a 3-6, a 6-3, a 4-6, a 6-2, then you learned as a child by quote unquote making mistakes. In other words, you learn by doing. And if you were ever labeled as somebody who screws up all the time, and maybe you were punished for quote unquote screwing up all the time, and you weren't allowed to experiment and explore, you may have shut that part of yourself down. And if you shut that part of yourself down, you actually shut down your ability to learn. If you have the gate 19, that's this gate down here coming off the root center, the square at the bottom, or an open emotional solar plexus, sometimes also an open G center here, you are a very sensitive person by design. And that sensitivity, that capacity to read the room and to feel and sense and know what everybody else was feeling, sensing, and doing, that empathic nature may have turned you into a wildly good, highly accomplished people pleaser at great cost to yourself. Or you may have been the one expressing all of the emotional energy for the whole family. Your sensitivity may have been derided and criticized, and you may have actually shut it down and not realized and not recognized that that sensitivity is a gift. That your sensitivity is a gift, and it allows you to sense and feel and know things that other people can't know. If you have an open spleen, the self-actualization, or any gates and channels within what's called the miracle circuit or the sensing circuit, you may have been much more vulnerable to overwhelm because you don't think logically and linearly. You see the whole thing. That's your gift. That's your gift. But what you may have struggled with is breaking things down into linear logical steps so that when your mom said, go pick up the Legos, and you walked into the room and you saw all the Legos on the floor, you just couldn't even figure out what to do because there were so many Legos. You needed help learning how to break things down into smaller, manageable steps. You needed to understand, first pick up the blue ones, then the red ones, then the yellow ones, then the green ones, so that you could get a sense of mastery over this overwhelm. You needed help learning how to put things in linear order. When we become adults, we go through specific developmental cycles where we learn how to be intimate and connected to each other and to our families and to our communities, where we learn how to take who we are and contribute and give it back to the world, where we learn to integrate our personal story and ultimately define ourselves in service to the whole. If we don't get our needs met as children, we can't grow up and complete these adult developmental tasks. It holds us back from being in healthy relationships. It holds us back from making our unique contribution and creating our legacy in the world. And it holds us back from using the story that we are born to fulfill in service to the world. And so if you've been stuck in any of these places in your own story, it might be time to rewrite that story. It might be time to go back and explore what happened in the energetics of your chart that we just looked at. What maybe happened that caused you to think that a part of who you are, your natural self, was not okay. And maybe that it wasn't safe for you to be who you are and how you are. If you want to begin the process of really integrating and healing your inner child, you have to first begin to understand your story and where it came from. And then you've got to cultivate compassion for yourself And really understanding your chart and understanding who you are through the lens of your chart gives you vital information to help you start to really embrace and accept yourself for who you are. I want you to start paying attention to the story you're telling about who you are. I want you to notice what that story is creating. And then I want to invite you into telling that story from a different perspective. What if you weren't the bad kid? What if you were a kid who was just really easily overwhelmed because you could see so many things at once? What if you weren't really the bad kid, but you were an exploratory learner and you needed to touch and feel and sense and move things around before you could really understand what these things were about? What if you weren't really the good kid? What if you're loved for who you are and not because of what you do for others? And what if you became the good kid because you were an empath? And what if that learning to be good caused you to deny your own needs and wants? And what if it's time now for you to say, hey, hold up. I get it. You all are upset, but it's not my problem. I can't fix this for you all. I need to take care of myself. What can you do as you begin to integrate some of these understandings? What kind of a ritual can you create for yourself to symbolize a new story? Do you need to take your old story and that old narrative where you defined yourself as the good kid or the bad kid, that fiction that you internalized, put it in a burlap bag, write it all out, put it in a burlap bag and throw it in the fire and start writing your new story? Or maybe you need to release it under the upcoming full moon. Or maybe you need to throw it in a rushing stream of water. But create for yourself a specific healing ritual to symbolize stepping into a new story. Reframe that narrative and begin to explore the question, was I a bad kid? Was I a good kid? Did I internalize that narrative? What is the rest of the story? How does the story actually end? Did I end the story at a chapter? Or am I going to take the rest of the story, take back control over the rest of the story, and write it the way that I choose? If you're interested in learning more about charts, unmet energy needs, child development, parenting, supporting parents, looking at personal stories and families and creating harmony at home for families, or even learning to interpret your own story or help yourself create a thriving family, I encourage you to check out our Family Coach Certification Training Program. The registration for this program opens only once every 2 years. So our registration actually is open until tomorrow night at midnight. So tomorrow, September 26th. The registration for the Family Coach Certification Training Program ends. This is a program where you get all the tools and training to effectively coach parents, families, and even learn how to coach your clients if they're struggling with inner child issues. You're going to get 8 recorded modules that come with workbooks, live calls, and workshops to help you master the Family Coach Certification system. You're going to get certified in Quantum Human Design's levels 1 and 2. You're going to become certified as a Parenting by Design facilitator. You're going to get certified as a Quantum Human Design family coach. Plus, you'll be part of a private coaching circle for community membership. So you're going to get access to several different kinds of certification trainings. These certification trainings are designed to help you create a thriving practice if that's what you choose, or they're designed to help you become a resource in your community or even a resource for your families. I'm going to give you in this training a step-by-step framework that you can immediately use to serve families, grow your practice, and literally start making an income as soon as you're done with the training. So again, you're going to get 8 recorded training modules plus workbooks. You're going to get 10 live Q&A calls with me. You're going to get a special kickoff community call that's going to get you started and give you a lay of the land of everything that you're going to be receiving. You're going to get the Parenting by Design 2-day live workshop. So I'm going to train you, in addition to being a family coach, I'm going to train you to teach the Parenting by Design program. So this is an entirely separate income stream that you can tap into if you choose to. You're going to get a full 2-day live workshop to learn how to teach the Parenting by Design program. You're going to get certification in Quantum Human Design's level 1 and 2. You're going to become a Parenting by Design facilitator. Again, you're going to be part of our private family coach circle community. And of course, if you added all this up, this is worth over $10,000. The training, if you register tomorrow before midnight, is on sale for 33% off. You're going to save $1,649. We're going to put in the chat all the information that you need and the coupon code to get the discount. Again, you have until tomorrow night, September the 26th at midnight, to register. And this will be the last time we teach the family coaching until 2027. 2027. We do have lots of payment plans available. I want to thank you all for being so patient with my internet being so glitchy today. I am so sorry. I do not know what is going on. And then my computer was also being glitchy. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for understanding. I am not an experiential learner, but I learned a lot today about my computer. Or I don't know if I learned it, but I did. But I also just want to say this. Sometimes we think, what can I do? What can I do? Sometimes we think, what can I do to make a difference in the world? Here's what I want to share with you. The most powerful and important thing that you can do in the world, for the world.
Okay, you guys, I think we officially lost Dr. Karen to the internet dysfunction of today. But I will just close this out here. Thank you all for joining us for this masterclass. There will be a replay that we will email out to all who registered. We have the link for family coach training is in chat. We'll also be sending that out as well. If you have any other questions about the training itself or anything that you learned today in our masterclass that you're curious about or you want to get started with quantum human design, just send us an email to support@quantumhumandesign.com. We have a lot of different options in terms of getting started in our community and ways to learn and grow. So I will leave it at that. Thank you all so much, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you and connecting with you all hopefully very soon. Bye, everyone.